for Twitch. Come on, Twitch. Twitch. There we go. All right. So we're online. I guess I better tell the world. Oh, that's not how you spell my name. All right. So, streaming game dev. Gonna do a software architecture paste. And then over here, the same thing. All right, so today what we're going to do is redo the entirety of the mission control system. I did it in 3 different phases with 3 different objectives, and obviously it's a tangled mess. So what we're going to do today is fix it up. And the first step is to get rid of the turn. The turn class has a lot of functionality that is all about controlling whether or not the player can use specific subsystems or specific people. And so what we're going to do is we're going to rip it out. And we're going to use a similar setup, but for a much more generic situation. One of the core principles of the systems method that I used to create this is that the subsystems are not instantiated. I mean, they can be, but it's not necessary. And what that means is that your ship doesn't have any subsystem state. It has system state, but it doesn't have subsystem state. So when we're tracking your use of subsystems, we're tracking, oh great, there's an update available. I bet you never would have guessed. So when we're tracking the state of what you've clicked on, we have to track who, what system you're using and what subsystem you're using individually. So one of the things we can do is we can switch that if we want to. We can switch it over to an instantiated version. We can go ahead and make it so that when you have a subsystem on your ship, we instantiate it into your ship properly, we track it properly, all that stuff. There's nothing terribly wrong with that idea. Let's just take a quick little look at the ship we've got here. This is our mission ship, and you can see that the actual engines and stuff, what it does is it keeps track of the subsystems like this. The subsystems are still in the queue. They're not instantiated. So if we wanted to do it with an instantiated setup, we would have to go and instantiate them. We would have to change how we create our ships. One of the advantages to not instantiating them is that they're easier to save. This means that the only difference between a cached, stock vehicle and the one you actually bring out in the field is a list of links. And that's why I created it like this. But I could also just as easily create it so that list of links instantiates. And if I do that, then I'll have an easier time tracking what is being used and what isn't, since it's a situation where you can have like 5 chemical tanks on your ship, and they should all be their own subsystem so that you can click on each one in turn. If I do that, then I'm not going to need to worry about all of the complexities that I was having with tracking subsystems and numbers on each one and all sorts of stuff like that. It was a little bit chaotic. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and change how we're creating the ships, and then we're going to go through and re-architect everything about how we track subsystems. It's going to make things a lot easier, a lot cleaner, and a lot of the confusion that we've been suffering is going to clear up. I like the way I architected it originally, where the subsystems are just links to stock subsystems, but it's not feasible for this particular kind of game because we end up shuffling them around a lot and using multiple subsystems on different systems, and it's just a pain in the butt. So we're going to go ahead and just instantiate them from now on. So if we go over into our scenes, here we are. Here's our shipbuilding scene. Just pop on in. The shipbuilding scene, when we hit play, what happens is we get a list of subsystems like so. And then when we click here and then click here, they get put into the ship. But as I mentioned, putting them into the ship actually doesn't put them in the ship. It just creates a link. So the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make it so that those subsystems are no longer links, but are now actually connected. And the way that that works is that we look at this ship edit canvas, and we got a ship editor, and we have these systems that get auto-filled. We got the inventory. Here's the inventory, potential subsystems. These potential subsystems list is the one we pick from. And basically, when we actually hit play, it fills up with UI elements. So you can see that we've got these UI elements. Each of these UI elements links to a specific subsystem that hasn't been instantiated, but we're going to go ahead and make it so it links to a specific subsystem that has been instantiated. Specifically, all the subsystems in your trash yard. What do you call it? Your space trash yard. So we need to have a space trash yard. We don't have one right now. So let's go ahead and create that. We're going to just grab a subsystems here. Just drop that in. This will be space trash yard list of systems. Junkyard. Junkyard, that's what it's called. Junkyard subsystem inventory. And this is going to just be our arbitrary junkyard list for subsystems. And then that's going to be what we pull our subsystems from. When we're looking for subsystems, we have this subsystem container here. Currently links to this, which is a list that is stock rather than instantiated. We're going to switch that over to pointing straight to the in-world junkyard subsystems list, which is instantiated. So all of these subsystems are actually in the scene. And then when we actually create links, now we're going to be creating links to particular instantiated objects. So if we take a look here, this is our ship subsystem chemical tanks. It's in the scene instead of linking to the stock. That's going to be valuable for us when it comes to trying to get this to work, but it will require us to do saving and loading in an annoying way, but not too annoying. It's just we're going to have to try and figure out which subsystems these subsystems actually are, and we're going to do that probably just by name. I hope that wasn't too noisy. I was taking a sip of coffee. I can never remember how noisy that is, if it is or not. Anyway, now that they're instantiated, the goal here is that we need to move them into the ship systems. So if we take a look at the pufferfish, this is our ship, the pufferfish. And if we take a look, these are the systems that we've got. And you can see how we've got these contents, but these contents aren't for the subsystems. These contents are for the visual 3D objects. So if we add video screens to the command, you can see that we didn't add video screens into the contents. Instead, we just added some 3D objects that make this look the way it looks. So we're going to have to actually move the 3D object into our setup. And to do that requires us to change how our UI elements currently work. And basically right now we have like an add to scene. Let's go ahead and just take a quick look. We've got an add to 3D object. So if we take a quick look at this, this is our setup. When we select it, it should fire off a generic subsystem, a generic subsystem UI select command. So if we open up the subsystem UI, oh geez, I suddenly got hiccups, which is great. As soon as you start streaming, you get hiccups. So what happens is that this has a reparent and an apply to challenge and apply all of these things that are not of any use to us anymore. What we're trying to get is the actual system where we end up moving it to a new object. So this has got a lot of crap in it that we're not going to need anymore, to the point where it's almost better to just delete it. But I think we're going to just try and refactor it instead. But still, the problem here is that this ship subsystem UI is just calling a generic select command, and it's not actually doing anything on its own. The generic select command is right here, onSelected.invoke this. There's something listening for the onSelected.invoke this. If we take a look down in here in the console, and we actually select something, so let's clear that. Okay, so it looks like there was an error due to the way that I was doing things while it was in play mode, or is there just a generic error? Object reference not set to an instance. Turn, subsystem used, parent system, parent subsystems, index of this. So check if blocked by turn is malfunctioning. Well, we don't actually want that, so let's go ahead and just get rid of it. This is me just hacking away at old code to refactor it. I'm sure that it's not terribly interesting, but this is the sort of thing where you're going to want to do it. So here we have this on start, check if blocked by turn, blah, 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 blah. There we are. There we are. So if we click on this and then we click on command, you can see that it says active subsystem is now command and this sort of stuff. This is inside the ship editor. So if we take a look at the ship editor, then we're going to find that we can go through and find all of the subsystems and then sign up for select subsystem. So the ship editor, what it does is it just waits for subsystems to say, hey, I was clicked on. So subsystem UIs, my bad. So these are subsystem UIs, and right now the ship editor class is waiting for me to click on one. And it goes, oh, hey, look, they selected a ship subsystem. So I'm going to remember that ship subsystem UI, and then I'm going to allow them to click on any of the systems so that they can put the subsystem inside the system. And then when you do that, it says, okay, good, nice job. We'll remember that. So basically, if we take a look, the select subsystem function here says if there's no active subsystem, then we don't know what you're doing and we'll just destroy ourselves. That's interesting. Down here it says active subsystem is now whatever. Oh, this is select system. This is select subsystem down here. So select subsystem. Active subsystem is such and such. And then go through all the systems and activate them. So basically it says we know what was clicked on. Activate all of the systems, because now what we're going to do is we're going to let you pick which system to put it in. And then here in the system select, we say if there was no active subsystem, then we don't know why these buttons are even active anymore, just barf. Otherwise, we are going to move the system to the active subsystem, we're going to move the active subsystem to the thing we clicked on. And then we are going to change the listener from select to detach. Easy enough, right? So what we're going to do is we are going to make this system.add subsystem do what we actually want it to, which is that it's going to actually move it to the system in question. The only problem is this system is not a system, it's a system UI. There's a lot of similar words going on here, and we have to be careful not to screw up. But what we're going to do is we are going to rename this symbol system UI. So that we don't get confused, because this is obviously something I did fast and on stream and didn't think about it too much. But we need to keep the UI and the non-UI elements named differently so that we don't ever get too confused. For example, this is called systems, but it's actually a systems UI, which is really dumb. So we're going to just rename that as system UIs. And this is going to be active subsystem UI. I think originally it might have been active subsystem, but I'm tempted to go through and just completely redo this entire setup. It's very basic and crap. So what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and rethink this entire process. So the inventory that we've got is where our ship subsystems are. It's the trash yard inventory. If we take a look at the ship editor class, it's not. It's actually this element here. So let's redo this entire setup because this is very half-assed. and confusing, and we don't want it to be. What makes this a little bit different than it was before is we didn't have a junkyard before. So now what we've got is we've got a junkyard, and the junkyard should be responsible for handling all of the junkyard related stuff. Whereas previously we were doing some kind of fake inventory where we were just kind of imagining that there was an inventory, and that was getting very confusing. For this, what we've got is we've got an actual in-world inventory, and we are responsible for understanding that. The question is, do we want the junkyard to be tightly bound to the junkyard UI or not? I think for now it's fine if it is. So let's go ahead and put a canvas inside of our junkyard. We'll call this the junkyard select display, the junkyard display, or junkyard UI. And this is going to be responsible for this. So this subsystems setup that we've got here, we are going to be moving it to the junkyard UI. Boom. And now this is responsible for creating the same systems that we were creating before. We shouldn't see any difference, except for now nothing should work. It should pop up, but oh, it still works. That's actually quite interesting. Anyway, the junkyard UI, oh, I know why that is. It's because we actually didn't change the link. So everything is still the same, except for now the junkyard UI is responsible for creating all of the subsystems that are being brought into this world. The subsystem UI is now the responsibility of the junkyard class. Sorry, I'm talking a mile a minute and I'm getting my words wrong. The junkyard contains actual instantiated subsystems. It's also responsible for displaying the fact that it contains actual instantiated subsystems. It's not that complicated. But what we've got here is the exact same actual setup for doing that. The subsystem UI is literally identical, but we're going to change it so that the junkyard has a different gating mechanism. And for that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a method where whenever the subsystems get clicked, we end up creating a new event that tells the ship editor that we're trying to add a specific subsystem to the ship. The way we currently do that is we actually track these all individually. But I think it would be better if we had a generic tracker that we could just submit subsystems to. I'm trying to think if that would be better or worse. I think it would be better, because we have to tell, the junkyard has to know when a system is leaving, and the ship editor has to know when a subsystem is arriving. Both of those things have to be done in sync, so they might as well be a single event where it's a generic static event that passes along a subsystem, and both of those elements get informed about it. So in order for that to be the case, this ship subsystem UI, blah, 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 we're going to be creating a ship subsystem collection. The only question is whether or not we're going to be creating the same ship subsystem collection for engines. We've already got a ship system. The ship system class contains compounders and other visuals. I think what we're going to do is we're going to create a class that is between the ship system and the mono behavior, and then we're going to descend from that for the ship system because it's got just additional 3D object stuff going on. So down here in ship editing, we're going to go ahead and go up, ship functionality, ship system. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a subsystem container. This subsystem container is going to track subsystems and understand when they want to leave, when they want to arrive. It's going to fire off some events when that happens. Maybe I'll also make it handle damage. That's in the future though. So we're going to drop that here into the junkyard subsystem inventory, and then we're going to pop it open. This is going to be responsible for tracking all of the subsystems that it contains. So public, void, I think that's within the ship. Yeah, it was in the ship namespace, the namespace ship. And basically, the reason that this is not just an array of objects without worrying about anything else is because it has to handle a lot of eventing, and I don't really want to create spaghetti code eventing. I'd rather have something that actually packages it up nicely. So we're going to have a subsystem list, which is just going to be called subsystems. And then we are going to let that just be as it is. We're also going to have a set of events. So when we are creating these events, we need to have a ship subsystem event. And I don't believe we've got one. If we look at the subsystem, hold on, let me move this stuff around. There we are. We look at the ship subsystem dictionary workaround subsystem event. It's just called a subsystem event, so that's what we'll put it in. So we'll go in here. Public static subsystem event. And we're going to have a couple. We're going to have an on subsystem activated, on subsystem leaving, and that's going to be probably enough. I don't think we're going to need anything else. These, however, are static, which means we have to instantiate them. Oh, that didn't work. There we are. So what we'll do is we'll trigger those, but they're static. I don't want them to be static. I lied. They're not static. They're specific to the container, obviously. So we've got a list of subsystems, and we got some events that fire up, and then we're also going to have a public void awake. And then what'll that do? It'll find all of our subsystems. Subsystems equals new list subsystem, and then we're going to find all of the subsystems. So GameObject.get components in children, subsystem, true. There we go. So what'll that do? It'll immediately set up our subsystems as a list of everything that is in us. So we don't have to manually do that. And then what we can do is we can just allow a UI element to do all the heavy lifting here. But we're going to need some stuff. So public void activate subsystem, subsystem, on subsystem activated dot invoke. There we go. Subsystem. But this is going to be a virtual so that we can override it. We're also going to want to have a virtual public void remove subsystem. Subsystem on subsystem.removed. Call this remove rather than leaving. There we are. And these are basically all we need for current setup. These are tracking actual subsystems, instantiated subsystems, and it should be fairly straightforward to have that work. We're going to need to redo this ship system setup so that it handles subsystems in this same way. There are two options there. One is we can have this ship subsystem descend from the subsystem container. Another is that we can have it reference a subsystem container. The problem is that the ship subsystem is mostly about creating visuals. So you can see that it's got add, it's got remove. Let's go ahead and just descend from the subsystem container. There we are. So now that we're descending from the subsystem container, we are going to have to do a little bit of wiring changes, not too many. The biggest change is that here, we're not going to be doing it like this. Instead, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding the subsystem by moving it into ourselves. So subsystem.setParent, or subsystem.transform.setParent, transform, and then we are going to add it to our subsystem list. It's that simple. That's all the change that we need. Similarly for remove, how are we going to remove it? Well, we could remove it by moving it to null, like just put it up as a root object, but instead we're just going to leave it. Leave subsystem as parented to us for now. It's their responsibility to move it. There we are. So that's just going to be a logical change rather than an actual change that we're responsible for. And that should be all we need to have it still work fine. I don't believe there's going to be any problems. The only thing we want to do is make sure that when we remove it, we're going to want to activate the remove subsystem command, which is remove subsystem. So we have a couple of options there. One is that we can just change this to remove, but I think remove subsystem is a better command for the generic. So that's what we'll do. If we take a look, this actually just invokes an event. It doesn't actually change the list of the subsystem. So we're going to go ahead and have that happen. Subsystems.remove subsystem. And then we go back over here. We don't need this anymore. And we're going to do this first. There we are. So now this should happen exactly the same way that it happened before. I don't think we've made any changes that have broken anything. We can always find out by hitting play. Nope. So the only change that we've done is that now this command should actually be in the command system. There it is, power conduits. So we've added the physical object to the command module, and that's what we wanted to do. Now we could just keep this up. This is now physically adding the modules. You'd think that would work fine. Here's the problem though. If we want to return these power conduits back to here, they don't go. Physically, they're still part of the command system. And that's because this subsystem container isn't actually being triggered properly. And the UI elements are all pretty crap. So we're going to keep refactoring until it's become simple again. So what we need to do is we need to make it so that the event system that we're currently using isn't listening to what we want it to listen, what it's currently listening to. The UI doesn't need to activate as a UI object and track as a UI object and all that stuff, because that's what it's doing right now. And the reason it's doing that is because previously the subsystems were not instantiated in the game world. So if you had 3 different instances of a specific subsystem, we would have to track that as 3 different like UI instances, not 3 different actual instances. So that was garbage. We're not going to do that anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to redo the UI elements and make it so that these UI elements just flat trigger the subsystem elements. So the UI is going to be a transparent triggering mechanism. And that should be a lot more compatible with a lot of more complicated stuff we're going to do later. So we've got a lot of subsystem UI stuff where it's like check if blocked by turn, check if has ability, blah, 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 blah. We're not going to delete that stuff yet. Nah, you know what? Let's go ahead and delete it. Boom. It's gone. So we might regret that, but who cares? This is a ship subsystem UI event on selected. That is the garbage event that we're currently using. We do not want that. We actually want that to barf, create errors, so that we know what we're trying to get rid of, right? So we've got a ship system UI parent, blah, 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 blah. None of this matters at all. The only thing that matters is that when we set our parent, it changes our visual a little bit. But here's the thing. Rather than wanting this to be linked to our parent, we actually want it to be linked to whether or not the subsystem has a parent. Here we are. Here we see that the subsystem on reparented add listener reparent. This is where it just checks to see whether or not the subsystem has been moved. That's not what we want. Instead, we're going to recreate the UI. So that's easy enough. We'll just get rid of this. Here we've got a select where we trigger onSelected.invoke. What we actually want to trigger is subsystem.select. I don't know whether subsystem.select exists yet, but it will. So the subsystem.select is going to trigger a simple event where it tells whoever's listening that it is activated. So to do that, we're going to have to add it. It's going to be after all of this stuff. There. Easy. There we are. And that's going to allow us to listen for events on specific subsystems rather than whatever else. But we know what? We're going to do one more thing. Public static subsystem event on global selected equals new subsystem event. And then down here, we're going to go on global selected.invoke this. The reason that I'm doing that is because now I can listen to either the specific subsystem or I can listen to all subsystems, both of which have their uses. All right, so the subsystem can now get a little bit of stuff going on. This onReparented mess, I don't know if I care. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. That onReparented exists solely because we were having problems with the previous setup where it was not instantiated properly. We shouldn't have any need for the onReparent, and now that we actually are doing it properly. This sort of setup here, int value ship subsystem, these are all issues that exist only because we are not supposed to be instantiated. So the one thing we need to do is set this up so that we can get our parent. So public subsystem or system parent. And that's just going to be return transform.parent.get system or get component system. Is it ship system? I think it might be ship system. Yeah, my bad. Because system is obviously a reserved keyword. Now, this is a little bit expensive, but not as much as you might think, because we're not recursively trawling for anything. We're just going to our parent and grabbing it. And it can be null, but maybe not. So here in value, what we're going to do is we are going to have a value that is we no longer need to have that the way we've got it. Public int value get. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take this base value and modify it by this stuff here. So if we move it up here to after base value and then we grab this, basically it's all the same except for we are going to be taking a look for our parent. But when we do this, it would be best if we cache the parent value. But then, of course, if it changes, we would need to track it changing, so we're not going to. We are going to just save it local. So subsystem parent equals this dot parent. I don't know why it's barfing. This dot parent is fine. It's right there. Oh, ship system. My bad. All right, so now we got if parent equals null, return base value. For each, check each of these. If it can activate inside the parent in the current activation phase, then return the activation. Otherwise, return base value. Yeah, more or less. And this is going to be something where we can just delete this, but it's going to barf a lot. That's fine. We want it to barf so that I can go through and weed out all of the references in the big long chain. This can activate ship system current parent, blah, 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 blah. Again, we're not going to be using that current parent. We're just going to be calling it parent. And again, we're going to go ahead and say ship system parent equals this dot parent. And this here, subsystem ability s.can activate. We're going to go ahead and leave the subsystem abilities this way. It's not going to matter one way or the other. And then here we got it activating on the right system like this. We are not going to, again, it's going to be ship system parent equals this dot parent, and we're not going to take this as an argument. We're not even going to take this as an argument either. We don't need it. It's just activate. So if parent.icon does not equal system, then we're reparenting as an action. And then we need to be able to find the ship. So we're going to go ahead and say parent.ship, and that's going to work fine. So we're finding the ship with the system that we're actually supposed to belong to. And if there is a target, then we're going to move ourselves. So for doing that, we're going to go ahead and say parent.remove. Yeah, that should work. Parent.remove this, and then we're going to say target.add this. So we're removing it, and then we're adding it, and then we're going to do an onReparented bit of nonsense. OnReparented is... We're going to just delete that for now. Otherwise, we'll just say, what? And then give up. Down here, we're going to check this subsystem ability A and abilities. If can activate for parent, then do so. There we go. There's a lot of other things we'll probably need to do to make this work, but this is pretty basic stuff. We've just ripped out all of the referencing that we were doing that was pretending that this was instantiated, even though it wasn't, and all sorts of nonsense like that. It was not very well designed, but now it should be a little bit better. Of course, we have a lot of errors because we have ripped out all sorts of stuff. Here in challenge, for example, we're trying to find whether or not the subsystem value works, and we previously were passing it the system that we were using. And then here, even this basic idea where we're applying the subsystem, ship system, and then ship subsystem, this is no longer necessary. We don't need to apply it to a specific system because the subsystem knows what system it is. So we're just going to go through and rip all of this out. And then we go through all of this, blah, 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 blah. But this value is now just a lowercase v. It's just a getter, no longer any need for it to be complicated. And then I think there's one more spot where it happens. It doesn't really matter. It'll pop up here if there is. Now that's not the same thing at all. There we are, value. Again, there's no value here. It is just getting the value. So we're just going to return there. And of course, we can, this is all like, we could just replace all of this with ternary. I'm not sure why I did it that way. You just do subsystem. Yeah, return subsystem. Subsystem.value 0. I'm not sure why I did it with the if-thens. It's just more wasted space, really. Well, there's no reason to rip it out. It's the same thing. Still, the problem with doing this live is you don't tend to think very. You're like thinking, but you're explaining at the same time, and it's not necessarily going to be any good. So subsystem UI here is going to try. It's going to track all this subsystem UI stuff. It's now time for us to rip all of this out. So this is the ship editor, and how is it going to work in the future? Well, instead of listening to the ship subsystem UI like this, it's going to be listening to the ship system. And that's going to be a different sort of process. Right now, we're actually listening to nothing but UIs. And what we're going to want to do is delete all of these. And this is a little bit iffy. Let's go ahead and start with the ship subsystem UI. Now, we're ripping this out, and it's no longer going to be able to do the things that we wanted it to do. So this is going to be a bit of a challenge, and I think that the best option for us is to literally delete all of these. And you might be like, what? Isn't that kind of important? Nah, it's fine. Just delete it all. That's going to be a pain in the butt to refactor because it has so many wrong assumptions in it. We're just going to get rid of it. It was just simple boilerplate. We're not going to worry too much about it. Easier to rewrite it rather than attempting to refactor it. So here we've got ship subsystem UI. The ship subsystem UI is attempting to call onSelected. There is no onSelected. There's a subsystem.select instead. Here we've got apply subsystem, where it's attempting to apply it to a subsystem. We don't need that anymore. The parent system is all set up. This turn use subsystem, we're going to go ahead and get rid of that. Just comment that out for the moment. No, we're not going to comment that out. We're going to delete it. Challenge.apply subsystem. I'm not sure about this because subsystems getting applied to challenges versus activating, this is a little bit of a misnomer, but we're going to go ahead and leave it for that now. We're going to want to probably change it, at least the names of it later on though. Here's a check of hasability. So in the generic update for the subsystem of UI, what we're doing is we're checking to see whether or not it can be activated. And what we're going to do is just comment that out. We're going to have to redo all of it, but I don't want to quite delete it just yet. Here we've got the onReparented setup. This is a secondary switch where the power is specifically to switch a subsystem over to a different parent. I think we'll be okay doing it like this. Yeah. Here's value again, just lowercase v. Yeah, that's correct. Here's activate, which doesn't take anything. That's a debug anyway. I expected more barfing. It's not going to work anymore, though. Now, the reason for that should be obvious. We deleted the ship editor. Nobody's listening. So what we've got to do is go back and create the ship editor fresh. This empty ship editor is going to have a transform inventory and a transform ship, except for we don't need this transform inventory. What we need is a public subsystem container, except for it's in a different namespace. So public subsystem container junkyard. And what that'll do is that'll allow us to get all the subsystems from the junkyard. Now the transform ship contains a number of systems. So that's going to also be a list of systems. Now why is that? Oh, no, right. So the difference between a ship system and a subsystem container is just that the ship system contains a couple of helper functions and some visuals. So these are functionally just a set of containers. The junkyard container, we're going to listen to that, and when that activates, we're going to let that transfer to a system of our choice. On the contrary, when a system activates, we're going to transfer it back to the junkyard. It's that simple. So it's just varying between the two sets. And that's not as hard as you might think. It's just a matter of listening properly. So here in start, we're going to say systems equals ship.getComponents in children, ship subsystem, ship system, not ship subsystem. There we are. We're just going to grab all of the ship systems that are active, and those are going to be the systems that we pay attention to. We're going to want to set up listeners. So junkyard.onSystemActivated, on subsystem activated, we are going to want to have that activate our select system function. So ready to select, how are we going to call this? Ready to install. And then we're going to want a setup for all of the other systems. For each ship system S, oh, that's not right. In systems, s.on subsystem activated uninstall. So down here, we'll create those functions, public void ready to install subsystem, and then again for uninstall. There we are. We're not getting a very good response to that because we are using ship. Isn't the subsystem inside of the ship namespace? Is it just not? Yeah, it's just not properly working at the moment. It happens. So we're going to just go ahead and let that be read, I guess. It'll fix itself eventually. Oh, that's the problem. It's actually add listener. There we go. Why is that barfy? Well, let's go ahead and see what it's barfy about. Is it just barfy because it's barfy? Subsystem is a namespace. That's right. Some idiot screwed up the namespace naming, or the namespaces in this. That's not a big deal. There we are. So what we're going to do is we're getting the subsystem and we are going to drop it into the correct cache. For that, we're going to need to have a public ship.subsystem selected subsystem, or subsystem to install. There we go. For ready to install, we're going to go ahead and say subsystem to install equals subsystem. And then what we're going to have to do is allow us to select any of the world's systems for us to be able to, click on. Unfortunately, there's no function for that, so we're going to leave it for now. Down here in uninstall, we're just going to take this subsystem and put it in the right space. So we're going to go ahead and say subsystem.parent.remove subsystem. And then we're going to say junkyard dot add. What is it? Just you know what? We're going to put that into the junkyard. So right now we've got the subsystem container and the ship system have slightly different capabilities because this has add and remove with a compound built in. What we're going to do is I think we're going to just go ahead and copy this add and remove functionality and put it down here as virtual functions. And we're going to just remove the compound. There we are. And that should work. And then we're going to go back over here into the ship system. These are going to be overrides. And what we're going to do is we're going to call the base. And then compound. It's very simple. Is that how you do it? Base.add, or was it? Oh, now I've forgotten. Let's go ahead and just check it. It's not autofilling. All right, well, let's just go ahead and ask Google C# base class function call. I think I can just call base.name. I think there might be a way to do it that doesn't have like a specialized keyword where I can say like base dot or this dot base or something. I don't remember. Well, this should work. All right, so got any barfing? Are these still actually there? No, they're not. That's just you not recompiling, which is, I guess, fine. So junkyard.add subsystem. And what that'll do is it'll remove it from the system in question and add it to the junkyard. But right now we don't have the ability to select systems. So what we need to do is in our ship subsystem, we need the ability to turn subsystems on and off for selectability. And what that is it's just going to be an argument, rather a function. It's going to be an event. So let's go ahead and do it. Oh, do we have the events? Yeah, we do. So that's going to be public unity event on hide and on show. And then we're going to have a public void hide on hide.invoke and a public void show on show.invoke. Now, why are we doing that? Because we have some UIs for these subsystems. And basically the UIs are going to activate and deactivate based on these calls. But first what we got to do is activate and deactivate them. So we're going to go through all of the systems. So the same setup here. s.activate or s.show. And then up here, we're going to do s.hide. And that should work. The only other thing we're going to want to do is make sure to hide again after we actually install something. So basically, once the system UI gets turned on so that we can choose a system, we need to have some way to listen to see whether or not the system has been selected. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to have a ship system event that is onSelected. Like so. And what we're going to do over here in the subsystem, in the ship editor, is we're going to listen for that. So it's going to be s.onSelected.addListener select system. Unfortunately for us, we were a little bit stupid and we forgot to actually make this an event for systems. So public system event. Can I get a ship system event in here? Yeah, there it is. Ship system event onSelected. So that should allow our ship editor to take in a ship system as an argument. And what we'll do is the same thing we did up in uninstall except for backwards. Junkyard.remove subsystem, junkyard.remove subsystem to install, and then system.add subsystem to install. But we need to make sure that there is one, subsystem to install. If there's not a subsystem to install, then debug.log error somehow clicked to install without choosing what to install. All right. So I've just been coding and coding and coding and coding and coding, and it's coming together. I've moved all of the UI level stuff down into the actual object level stuff, and the reason for that is because those are object level operations. I just didn't have objects before. I had data and no objects. By moving it into an object, I can clean up the process a little bit, and I can make the UI layer much thinner and less obnoxious, while simultaneously giving me more options. So what we're going to do is, well, we are creating the subsystem UI, but we are not really creating the system UI yet. So there is something that does create the system UI. Let's find it. Here it is, ship UI. This ship UI creates the subsystem UIs, creates the system UIs rather than the subsystem UIs. This is responsible for building the ship system UI interface. And what we need to do is make sure that the actual ship system UI understands that it can be turned on and off. So here's the ship system UI. Here it is. So what happens here is it's got this ship system UI event, which we don't care about. We're going to delete that. If there's still anything using it, it's wrong. Instead, what we do is we find our system and we select it like so. And that's basically the only change we need to make, except that we need to monitor our ship system and activate and deactivate ourselves as the ship system demands. So in order for us to do that, we are going to, look, button, activate and deactivate. All we're going to do here in start is sign up for that nonsense. And so to do that, we are going to just attach ourselves to our system. Easy as pie. Only problem is that these, well, no, there's no problem. They should work fine. So now that should work again, but the only issue we've got here is that a lot of this is still very deeply tied to our UI-centric nonsense. We got remove system and add subsystem, and these are nonsense. These are absolute garbage. We'll just delete them all. Goodbye. And really all we're trying to do is, if subsystem UI prefab, ship subsystem in subsystems, add subsystem, SUI false. Okay, so we don't need to worry about that. The only issue we're going to have is that this is also responsible for, okay, so we can't actually just delete those, because it's also responsible for tracking the subsystem UI, for creating and deleting subsystem UIs. And now that we are changing how this works, we need to be able to create and delete subsystem UIs as required. That's not as hard as it sounds, but it does mean that there is one missing piece, which I am just an idiot. I don't know why I forgot. Here in subsystem container, we've got events for removing, but not events for adding. So we're going to go ahead and add that. There we are. There we are. And so what we're going to do is here in our subsystem UI, we're going to attach a regenerate command to this. So system.on subsystem added.add listener regenerate and on subsystem removed. Yeah, this is just obnoxious. I don't think we want any of this here. So just delete that. We'll do it manually. We'll do it afresh. Void, or make it public void regenerate subsystem affected system. Now here's the thing, affected system doesn't matter. We'll just make it okay even if it's null, because all we're going to be doing is making sure that this here works. So what we're going to do is call regenerate. And then regenerate is going to go through and set up for each of the ship subsystems a subsystem UI. But we do have to delete all of the current subsystem UI. So what we have to do is track all of the created subsystem UIs, which we don't currently do. So we do track it. Here it is. Subsystem UI, except for we gotta make it that. And if we take a look, we don't actually add it. So subsystem UIs.add SUI. Up here, we're going to go through and clear them all out. Ship.subsystem, which is going to be subsystem UIs. For each subsystem UI, S in subsystems, destroy s.gameObject, and then at the end, subsystem UIs dot remove or clear. Does S have a self-destruct? I don't think it does. No. All right, so that should be fine. We're just going to regenerate everything if anything changes. Grind, grind, grind. There's no remove subsystem because there's no such thing. Reparent. Oh, it's just remove and add rather than, well, system UI. I don't want a system UI. So this is archaic. Goodbye. None of these. Well, I guess we'll leave those for now. We'll probably need to do some recalculating, refactoring there. Grind, grind, grind. There we are. Now let's see whether we've approached any sort of usability. If we click here, null reference exception. That's only one null reference exception. What is the null reference? Oh, we forgot to, that's what the problem is. I forgot to actually set it up. You got to set it up before it works. So here's the ship edit canvas, and you can see that our ship editor doesn't have a junkyard. It does have a ship, right? All right, so if we click, all right, so something is happening where it's not currently firing properly, and it could be anything. So we're going to go ahead and add in some debugging for our setup here. And one of the ways we can do that is we can just add debug logs. Another way is that we can add in a debug switch. I'm tempted to add in a debug switch because the actual systems might become quite complicated. I think we're going to be okay with just adding in some debug. Give me a moment here. Subsystem container name activated subsystem.name. So when we are creating the subsystem containers, they're full of subsystems, but are we actually signing up for the subsystems so that we can activate when they fire? Because at the moment, the subsystem container needs to have this triggered, and I'm not sure whether or not we're actually listening to the subsystems. So what we might need to do is actually listen or have the subsystems tell the subsystem container that they've been activated. I think listening is a better option. There we are. Now, we're also going to have to add in the ability to add and remove this particular listener as systems change. So and then down here, we're going to want to remove it. That might be enough to fix our problem. Let's take a look. Oh no, I'm getting super hungry. Almost, so close. This needs to be gone. It's behaving correctly, but this UI element should have dissolved. And the problem is that it didn't. So if we want to know why this didn't dissolve, the chain that leads to the dissolution of that is that the ship system UI, which is right here, has a regenerate command. And this is what needs to be called. Unfortunately for us, the regenerate command isn't being properly called. It's supposed to be called whenever we add or remove a subsystem from the system that we're attached to, which means that the system we're attached to isn't properly firing off its on subsystem added or on subsystem removed. If we take a look here, it should fire subsystem on selected for add. Here it is, on system, subsystem added, on subsystem removed. So let's go ahead and just track this a little bit. Debug.log added subsystem.name to name. And then here, removed. From name. Now let's go ahead and add in a debug switch. And then down here we'll just say if debug. Now the reason we're saying if debug rather than having a function that gets called is because that way we save on compiling the strings, because these strings won't get compiled now. So now that we have that set up, we can go down to the Junkyard UI and tell it there it is. All right, so when we click on the power conduits, we subsystem container activated it, and then we click on command, remove power command, remove conduits from Junkyard subsystem inventory. So that's the remove, which should have called regenerate. Let's go ahead and just add a regenerate thing to see whether or not we are actually regenerating. Debug.log regenerating system.name UI. It may be that we're just regenerating before we finish removing, in which case we'll just reorder things a little bit. Removed and regenerating command UI. So it regenerated the command UI, but not the Junkyard UI. So the Junkyard UI never got regenerated. And that could be because the ship subsystem UI isn't properly Ship subsystem UI spawner. Is that not the same thing we're using? The ship UI is not the same as the ship subsystem UI spawner, is it? I think the difference here is that the ship UI creates system UIs, and the system UIs are what regenerate properly. I don't know whether or not the Junkyard actually has a system. No, it's a different function. So we've got two very similar classes. We've got the ship system UI, and then separately we have the subsystem spawner. The ship subsystem spawner has fewer functions, and that's fine, but we need to be able to do the same setup. So we're just gonna, we could consolidate them, but I think it might be easier if we just regenerate. Just copy this setup. And again, we're going to want to sign up for this. So this is a ship subsystem UI prefab. This is subsystem container. This is actually going to be a subsystem container instead of a transform. But what did I call it? It's just called a subsystem container. Ship.subsystem container, I guess. There we are. There we are. Oh, we need to delete. That's right. So for each transform T in content target, destroy T.gameObject. All right, so that's a nice simple little thing. It does the same thing on much less code because it doesn't have to worry about any of the complexity. But of course, we're going to have to reassign the subsystem target. So hit play, see whether or not it works now. Power conduits to command, yeah, fine. Go back, perfect. Vid screens to support, fine. Go back, perfect. All right, so now we've got no problem with it, and I'm hungry. So we're going to stop here so that I can eat a huge bowl of curry. But basically, what we did for the past hour is we just refactored. But now that we've refactored, what we'll be able to do, and I'll probably do this off screen unless I run out of time, is just redo the mission system, because right now the mission system is like a tremendous mess. So it's much better if we can unmess it. And that's going to be a bit of a process. I might do it on camera, I might not. Let me know if you have a preference. Otherwise, I'll see you again on Wednesday or next Saturday. We're going to make steady progress on this, but once we finish with the refactoring, I think things will be a lot smoother. I went in without really understanding my end goal. So now that I have my end goal, got to refactor some of that architecture and make sure that it works out. Still haven't done saving and loading. That's going to be a little bit annoying, but not too bad. All right, have a good one.